This is Post Malone, and this is also Post Malone, and so is this, and this, but now this? So what the f*** happened?
Somebody pour me a drink, somebody bum me a smoke.
2024 is the year of country music. Hell, so was 2023. Morgan Wallen's Last Night sat atop the Billboard charts for 16 weeks, and not only was the biggest song of the year, but was off the year's biggest album as well. Country artists new and old are selling out stadiums around the world. Other genres are finding ways to capitalize off their success, and a whole generation is square dancing to shaboozy songs in the bars. But as this genre rose, the conversation around another one began settling in. Hip-hop numbers were down, and the pop stars were trading 808s and hi-hats for live bands and guitars, with legends like Beyoncé and Lana Del Rey throwing their hats into the ring and successfully doing so. But they weren't the only ones. Enter Post Malone, whose career has been nothing short of euphoric. And while his entrance into rap was heavily criticized due to a flurry of comments and actions, Post has been able to dominate the modern pop charts with his fusion of hip-hop and pop singer-songwriter sensibilities, until he couldn't anymore. At the turn of the decade, he went from undeniable hitmaker to a fading star of the SoundCloud era, to the point where he couldn't even make the decision as to when his next album would be released. And it might be because nothing he was releasing was working, until one day he traded his Bentley for a tractor and found himself a home among the fans that we had all thought faded away. But not a new home, actually a place he always said he'd return back to. Post Malone's foray into country has been welcomed with nothing but open arms. He scored his first #1 as a lead artist since 2019, headlined the Country Music Festival stagecoach with no country album out, and even performed America the Beautiful at the Super Bowl this year. The release of his 6th studio album, F1 Trillion, has brought back discussions as to whether Post used hip-hop to gain fame, and has had me thinking about not only the career trajectory of Austin Post since the release of White Iverson, but how he's just been a cog in the pop music machine since 2016. So today, we're here to get to the bottom of why Post Malone's making a country album, what is pop music in 2024, and ultimately, who really is Post Malone? Because somehow, the guy who looks like he could be the 4th member of album The Chipmunks went solo and became an international sensation.
Oh baby, go on, keep it spreading. Oh, yuck me up, I don't want no romancing.
By now, I think everybody knows Post Malone's come up. He drops White Iverson on SoundCloud in 2015, literally blows up overnight, gets a lot of shit for being a white guy with cornrows and girls and calling himself the White Allen Iverson, gets the Kanye feature, goes on tour with Bieber, yada yada yada. Post Malone with Lil Yachty and Lil Uzi Vert were these kids blowing up on SoundCloud and becoming overnight sensations, and filling these roles as the poster children for this new SoundCloud generation of hip-hop. But Post was always quick to correct anybody that would box him into that group. To Post, he was just an artist who expressed himself wherever he pleased, and wasn't bound to any genre. He even spoke about his ambitions to make a country album when he turned 40. It was to the point where when the 2016 XXL Freshman cover came along, their editor-in-chief had revealed that they had reached out to his team, and were told that he wasn't focused on hip-hop and was going in a more pop, country, and rock direction. Because if Yachty and Uzi were considered rappers, to see Post completely ingrain himself in the culture, not only sonically, but visually, but then rejected behind the scenes was just really weird. And to a lot of people, it was just a slap in the face and culture vulture-esque. But now in retrospect, looking back in that moment in time and the pop scene at that current moment, rap had become pop music at that point. And the pop stars needed to play catch up. And not only to seek a crossover hit, but make full-on albums against the current backdrop. Trap drums and production were everywhere, and it had just been ingrained in pop's DNA. I mean, whether it was Bieber or Ariana or Taylor to an extent, the stars were well aware of the power that hip-hop held in the youth culture, especially in that moment. And Post Malone was a pop artist whose entry point was hip-hop because that was pop in 2015 and 16. I do think that confusion around him after his initial explosion, and whether or not he was a rapper or just using the culture, left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And I believe resulted in some signs of no confidence from the label after the buzz on him kind of waned. Which then made for a pretty uneventful 2016. Like, this breakout star gets his album delayed and then dumped into December. That's just not a good look. But then, they end up figuring out the formula for him about a year later. When, and this is just me putting on my tinfoil conspiracy theory hat as to what happened, they released his 21 Savage assisted lead single to his sophomore album, Rockstar. Hours later, this fan film video of him singing the Stoney cut, I Fall Apart, hits the internet. And the video not only goes viral on Twitter, but goes bananas on a circa 2017 Facebook. And for everyone confused by that, post-Trump election Facebook was just a bunch of kids you went to high school with, and parents reposting memes and videos and fighting about politics. But the big thing that would go on would be the reposting of these videos of these new singers and rappers. But of course, they weren't even new. They'd be like a year late to them. And the caption captions would be like, "This is so real." And it would be like the Joyner Lucas "I'm Not Racist" video. And I think if SoundCloud is what got you in the room, Facebook viral videos are what made white people lose their minds over you. And that's exactly what happens here. The video just goes bonkers and definitely helps Rockstar turn into the sensation that it becomes. Rockstar went #1 on Billboard for 8 weeks. I Fall Apart becomes a big hit, and Sony peaks on Billboard a year after its release. It's after this where we start to hear a more confident Post Malone on hip-hop and distance himself from the genre even more than he had done so before, but then still put out hip-hop adjacent music. There's the infamous beer tasting interview where he claims that if you're looking for lyrics, if you're looking to cry, if you're looking to think about life, don't listen to hip-hop. The quote about it being hard to be a white rapper, or the rant at Live where he went after people calling him a culture vulture. There were just a lot of problematic moments that kept happening to him in regards to his respect for the genre. And at this point, the rock and country music that he was always talking about in interviews and getting tattoos of was going through one of their worst decades. But he never had a word of criticism to say about any of them. And I don't think any of it was malicious, but I think it goes deeper into a bigger issue at play here. Which if you know how we do it here, we'll get back to that one later. But also don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you like hearing a 10 years late for the Jersey Shore audition moron like me talk about pop culture. There's nothing I love more than making these videos and being able to talk with y'all in the comments. You can also follow me on all the socials like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at KidXVintage, where you'll be able to get even more commentary from me on there, and you can keep yelling at me there if you want to get your point across. So yeah, hit like and subscribe, and let's get back to the show. The next 2 albums are gigantic and still follow the Post Malone formula, which is a pop rap album with rap features and trap production throughout, Trojan horsing a few straight pop songs that swing for the top 40 fences. At this point, it felt like you couldn't stop Post Malone, even if his star was fading with hip-hop fans who were starting to see through it all. He had pop music in the palm of his hands, until it wasn't anymore. As we enter the next decade, we went almost 2 years without new Post Malone music. And of course, there were reasons why his output slowed down, but things just kind of kept on moving. It wasn't until the summer of 2021 that he would make his solo return with a Cole Bennett-directed music video for his new single, Motley Crue. A pretty run-of-the-mill trap song that made absolutely no waves. And from there on, a string of moves keep being made that are just not connecting like they used to. A Weeknd collab, flops. A Roddy Ricch collab, flops. The usual label push he got seemed to be non-existent. And then it comes out that his new album is being held by Republic, which is kind of wild to think about. A post beer bongs and Hollywood's bleeding Post Malone can't walk into the Republic offices and say, "I dropped Friday," like Taylor and Drake can. When it eventually dropped in the summer of 2022, it completely got lost in the fray. And while tonally it definitely was a little more emo than usual, it still by design was a Post Malone album. The Doja record does decent business on the charts, but I think that could be attributed more to the success and fever around Doja Cat at that moment. And while Post was always quick to clarify if he was hip hop or not, 12 Carat Toothache was the exact product of the odd moment that hip hop was going through before. Because hip-hop's pop music grip was slowly starting to weaken since 2020. And the ways he knew how to hack his way to the top of Billboard in years prior weren't going to cut in this weird transitional period that was going on across music. Was music genreless now? Are we just waiting for the next wave? There are a lot of questions floating around, bringing a Post Malone type back to the drawing board. And when the going got tough, it was time for him to make a pop album. And not just a pop hip-hop album, but like a pop album. Like straight Max Martin pop music. His visual style changed. He starts dressing differently. He starts doing a lot more rock and country covers than usual surrounding the release. And the lead single, Chemical, was his alt-rock pop record. And the album was just purely synth pop. But even then, the album felt a little too late in 2023. Like if Taylor Swift's Midnights was the pinnacle of the synth pop revival that was going on, Austin felt like dropping Rockstar in 2021, which is kind of what Motley Crue is, if we're being honest. Again, it just felt like the wrong moves kept being made over and over and over again. And ultimately was an Emperor with no clothes moment for Post Malone. Now the pop star he always claimed he was, but lost in limbo with no idea where to go next.
Tell me that it's all okay.
Here's the thing. Post Malone wasn't the only one lost in the last few years. That pop punk revival kind of fizzled out. Bieber's last few years have been a little all over the place. The Weeknd may be one of the biggest artists out, and After Hours is one of the defining pop records of the decade, but there was definitely something going on when it came to his newer music not nearly reaching those highs. So I wanted to really think about it. If you had to define male superstar pop music in the 2020s, how would you? The Weeknd is still riding off an album from 4 years ago. Harry Styles is huge, but it's not like he's dropping often. Bruno Mars is gambling in a casino, allegedly. And Drake, we've talked about him at length here. And putting these guys aside, it's not like they're new, and it feels like they were younger stars waiting in the wings for their moment at superstardom, like a Troye Sivan or Omar Apollo or Dominic Fike, but they've just been relegated to a more niche section of pop music. Everything in that space just started to feel really directionless. There wasn't a new Drake or Adam Levine or like a Fall Out Boy that filled the sacrificial pop star role in those genres. While on the female end, the pop girlies are thriving. Olivia could be the revival of 90s, early 2000s alt pop. Taylor Swift's the biggest star alive. Beyonce's now a thriving elder statesman. Sabrina Carpenter is just a traditional pop star in every sense. You have Billie Eilish, plus the superstar transformations of Doja Cat and SZA. On that end, it's just so easy to rattle off these names because they truly rule pop music now. And I say this all because this creates a massive problem for Post Malone. Because what Post Malone essentially is whatever he needs to be in that moment. So to get famous in 2015, you've got to be a rapper and play into the persona. And he was able to do so for a while. Even when he kind of ditched the rapper aesthetic, he still was using the genre as a continued stage because it was still able to attract the demographics he needed to keep it going. And honestly, what did Post Malone bring to the table that a lot of the other auto-crooning artists couldn't at the time? Like, aside from being able to write a song like Circles, when it came to the more melodic trap songs that were the majority of his discography, it wasn't even like he was the best at that or that he brought different perspectives to those songs or did unique things with them. Like, his albums aren't even genre bending. They really genre hop for the most part. And it's because of artists like him, the pop music's embracement of hip hop sound, and a lot of artists just kind of rinse and repeating, mainstream hip hop got watered down. And a lot of the passive listeners began to grow tired of it. And the only music of the genre that could combat this were from the rappers who shift and curate culture. But you're not getting those songs every week. You're not getting those albums every week. Sure, waves come and go, but for Post Malone, the audience that he had his grip on weren't particularly the bastions of hip hop culture to begin with. If anything, they were the ones who now shared similar sentiments to him about how he viewed hip hop and that it was just party music. And other genres are where you can go to feel something, which is, just bullshit. His target audience had a new genre to listen to on the weekends, and it was a genre that he always had a love for. A genre that would have never made him the star that he would end up becoming if this is how he arrived on SoundCloud in 2015. And a genre that I just do not understand.
Bucket. Wow.
I say this with all the disrespect and disdain that I can. 2024 is the year pop went country. I mean, hell, you can argue it's been for at least 2 years now. But my God, was I in denial. I'm just playing, but to be completely honest, this whole wave kind of hit me like a bus. Morgan Wallen had the biggest song and album of 2023. Kacey Musgraves can now sell out arenas. Luke Combs is a superstar. You have all these young acts popping off like Zach Bryan, Tyler Childers, Shabuzi, Lainey Wilson, and people like Noah Khan, who's more of a folk artist, but definitely has elements of country seeping throughout his music. Like what hip hop was to pop in the last decade, in the last 2 years, the tides have turned. And a lot of the new superstars are country artists. Just like how in the 2000s and the 2010s, it was the rock stars, the DJs, and the rappers. And that's normal. Things come and go in and out of style. And in these last 2 years, it was time for a new genre to take the reins. And like that, what we saw with hip hop, whatever the next wave was, pop stars were going to gravitate to it. And they sure did. Lana Del Rey is set to drop a country album produced by Jack Antonoff. We recently got Beyonce's masterpiece, Cowboy Carter. Bruno Mars heard what I said about him a few minutes ago and decided to drop a comeback single with Lady Gaga, fully leaning on the 1970s country star aesthetic in the video. And of course, Post Malone, who of course had voiced how eager he was to eventually dive into country music at some point. And his foray into it feels like we're living in a weird, bizarro world. Because in the same year where Beyonce's new country single was questioned if it could be played on country radio, Post Malone had a headlining set at Stagecoach without even a solo country album out yet. Post's collaboration with Morgan Wallen on I Had Some Help is genuinely in the conversation for Song of the Summer. Not my Song of the Summer, but there is a conversation out there. And in that had generated hype for his new album that has not been there in years. Now, this country rebrand, it seems to have been carefully calculated over the last few years or so. It's like I pointed out before. With Post Malone, it's kind of all or nothing. And in this, he has finally been able to realign with the demographic he always was speaking to. Because his demographic isn't looking specifically for Post Malone's music. Post Malone was just who they needed at that moment in their lives. The difference between him and Beyonce and Lana is that Beyonce didn't need to do country music. She just finished a sold-out stadium tour off a dance album. It's not like Lana Del Rey's relevance has been hurting, but Post Malone did clearly need it. Just like he needed hip-hop to be his launching pad. Post Malone is a reflection of popular music more than anything. And that for him to survive as a popular artist, he must always adapt with his audience. And in 2024, his audience wasn't looking for college pregame music or dreamy guitar pop. They're looking for songs to tailgate tailgate to, and backyard barbecue music, or those slow country guitar ballads. He's using country music and his wealth of blockbuster talent as a way to reclaim his spot on the pop music throne, just like he had done in the first act of his career. The only difference between now and then is he finds every opportunity to show appreciation for his acceptance into this genre. In a recent New York Times profile, while he never outwardly apologizes or addresses the hip-hop community, he acknowledges that he could have handled things better when it came to the criticism of him. And all this comes after a section of the piece where country guitarist Derek Wells had nothing but praise of Post for not playing dress up, asking permission to be a part of the genre, and showing appreciation for it. Which, when you're from Dallas, Texas, used to post covers like this on the internet before you blew up, spoke about country and folk music any chance you could, and laid it out very clearly that you would eventually make a country or folk album, asking these guys permission to do so is like asking your mom if you could open the fridge in your house. And even with this, you can sense Post still feels a way about his critics in the hip-hop space, telling CBS Sunday Morning in the lead up to the album that he was just a kid and it all made him turn to alcohol to cope. The whole thing is framed in a way of how dare they criticize some kid making music, and that the country music scene is now this majestic wonderland of acceptance, and that hip-hop wronged Post Malone at the end of the day. But I think Post Malone can make whatever music he wants, that's fine. But this is about appreciation more than anything. This is about recognizing that something got you somewhere, and without it, you wouldn't be here now. And I think just an acknowledgement of that fact means something. But sadly, that's just the music industry in a nutshell. You're only as good as what you just did for me.
Diamonds in my chain go up. Okay. Every 20 minutes change clothes. Money made me do it, I said.
I like Post Malone. I'd even say I like him a lot. He seems like a nice guy. He's made a lot of music that I genuinely love, and we all say things we regret. But in his transformation from hip-hop to country star, he's proven more than anything that at the end of the day, he's a loyal soldier of the pop music machine. A mirror of whatever's working around him at the time. When one genre goes up, another one goes down, and the cycle just continues. Post Malone never lied to us about who he was from the jump. Whether it was hip-hop, rock, or country, his main objective was just to always connect with audiences. And the ability to offer them whatever their needs are is versatility that doesn't go unnoticed. It makes sense why Post Malone is the star that he's become. He can make bangers for the hype beast, and beer-drinking sing-alongs for former sorority sisters and frat bros who traded Rolling Loud for Stagecoach. In 2024, he finally figured out who he was speaking to. And while that music may not be for my taste anymore, it would be wrong of me to yuck someone else's yum if you enjoy the country album that he just put out. Art and culture are powerful, and this means something to people. But I'm not listening to Applebee's ass commercial music.
Somebody pour me a drink. Somebody pour